So yesterday, California Governor Gavin Newsom said he was throwing the death penalty on ice. Let's go ahead and listen to him explaining why he said the death penalty doesn't represent California values. Cut 3.
We were laying claim to having the largest death row in the Western Hemisphere, the largest death row in the United States of America, 2 times the size of the next largest state, Florida. And it didn't necessarily square and doesn't necessarily square with, I think, the values that are represented in the folks behind me and represented in the hearts and minds of tens of millions of Californians. I think we're better than this.
He also went on to insinuate that a lot of people on death row are there and are wrongfully convicted and didn't do what they were accused of doing. A lot of people on death row, I'm sure this morning, are very happy, including Troy Ashmus, who worked at a carnival. In 1984, he raped and suffocated a 7-year-old girl, stuffing cellophane bags and her own shorts down her throat.
I'm reading about a man named Richard A. Benson. He used a claw hammer to kill a mother and her 23-month-old baby, and then he repeatedly sexually assaulted the woman's 3- and 4-year-old daughters in a shed before he murdered them too.
How about Michael Cook, who killed 2 elderly women when Cook set fire to their mobile home so he could burglarize neighboring trailers?
Eric Bennett raped and robbed a woman living next door to him, and then he killed another woman that hired him to install flooring.
Paul W. Baker killed a 60-year-old woman who'd taken him in after she met him at an AA meeting. During trial, he was accused of raping women he'd met at recovery groups. He interrupted his trial by screaming and smearing his face in his own feces.
Robert M. Bloom shot his father to death, his stepmother, and his 8-year-old stepsister, whom he also stabbed 23 times in her face with scissors. He pleaded insanity. He was allowed to represent himself at trial. His sentence was overturned, and he was resentenced to death in 2001.
Lawrence S. Bittaker, Pliers Bittaker, with partner Roy Norris, roamed Los Angeles in 1979 as the Toolbox Killers. They murdered 5 teenage girls over 5 months.
Oh, my God. This Lamar Barnwell, this guy killed 4 people in one night. He shot 2 men in the head while they were kneeling. That's execution style. Then the killing was witnessed by a police officer who was responding to a woman's screams. His other victims, a man and woman, were also shot in the head. He was convicted of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of second-degree murder.
Cimarron B. Bell and an accomplice used a car sales ad to lure 3 people to a home so they could rob them and murder them. He then fatally shot his girlfriend in the head because he suspected that she was stealing from him.
And Michael Cook killed 2 elderly women. He set fire to their mobile home so he could burglarize neighbors' trailers. So those are just a couple of examples of what is sitting in death row right now.
Yes, and these are the people that the politicians in Sacramento have sympathy for.
Not
and
the
their
little
victims
girls
aren't around to tell their side of the story.
The baby, not the mother, not her 2 little girls who went through horrific
It's unbelievable.
last moments.
Joining us to weigh in on this is victims' rights advocate Debra Tate, who you can follow on Twitter at Debra_Tate9. Good morning, Debra.
Hi, Deb.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Oh, this news. Wow. Okay. Where were you when you heard it? And tell us more.
My door flew open night before last at 11 o'clock, and they said, turn on the news, turn on the news. I had company, and they said he just overturned or suspended the death penalty, and that's the last thing I wanted to hear that late at night. Yesterday, I heard his excuse for having done this. The state of California has done this twice before, in 1972 and in 1973. The people voted and reinstated the death penalty. They did it again in 1976, and in 1977, the people got together again and reinstated the death penalty.
Right.
Each time they do something like this, these people that are pending trial commute their sentences, as in my killers, the Manson family. Their sentences are commuted to some other version. And eventually, as we all know, I'm fighting and have been fighting for the last 30 years, the release of these individuals. So some people think, oh, that means that the killers that you just mentioned will be in prison for the rest of their lives. Not necessarily. California has historically come up with an excuse, or I call it an excuse. They've implemented laws in the higher courts allowing these people's sentences to be commuted and releasing them back into the public. Now, their victims don't get to come back, and their victims' families are to be changed forever.
Well, on that point, Deb,
justice is this?
Deb, can you stick with us for one more segment? Because people often say being in prison for the rest of your life is worse than being executed, which I do not believe to be true. But I do believe that it puts an extra added amount of stress on the family members of the victims, because it essentially dumps a full-time job on their shoulders if they're going to be on top of this and make sure that the system doesn't break down and fail. And even if they do everything right, sometimes the system breaks down and fails anyway. I'd like you to respond to that when we come back.
Okay.
Our guest is Debra Tate, victims' rights advocate. We'll have more from her in minutes. Yesterday, Gavin Newsom said that he was issuing a moratorium on the death penalty in California. By the way, I don't know if you caught this, but he took a subtle shot at the Clintons as he was doing it. Because back in the 90s, Democrats were more hard on crime than they are today. Like Gray Davis was great on crime and punishment.
Yes.
Bill Clinton signed the crime bill when he was president.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, when they were promoting the crime bill, said, look, we need increased sentences because we have some of these super predators out there that are doing horrible things.
Yes.
Super predator was her line. Listen to what he had to say on that, cut one.
I lived through the super predator generation. 3 strikes and you're out. We went to this mass over-incarceration, and now the pendulum's swinging in a new direction.
What?
Well, now we're pro-criminal.
Yeah, I guess. A new direction means criminals aren't going to criminal anymore? Baloney. Murderers aren't going to murder anymore? That doesn't happen.
Debra Tate is joining us, victims' rights advocate. Debra, before we get to the difference between the death penalty and life in prison, do you want to respond to that? Because he took aim at the Clintons. He took aim implicitly at people like Pete Wilson and Gray Davis.
And he spoke personally to Mark Kloss, whose daughter was murdered by someone who's on death row. I mean, how do you do that?
There's a lot of people that don't get it until it happens to them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they lack empathy. They cannot walk in anybody else's shoes, and this is a crying shame. I do everything that I do to try to prevent what happened to my family from happening to anybody else's, and that is the only reason that I do what I do. So there are super predators. There are killers. There are definitely 2 different types of killers. Those that kill by accident and are less likely to repeat. And then there are predatory killers. And I think that we could see just in the last 2 weeks excellent examples of such things. There were 2 children attempt to be snatched Sunday in Lake Elsinore, 3 and a 4-year-old, and it was thwarted by the 4-year-old's parents, thank God. And that beautiful little girl that was found along an equestrian trail, stuffed in a suitcase, half-starved. And these are sexual predators that are coming out early. There are certain personality factors that are known in the psychiatry community that we cannot fix. It is not possible to rehabilitate these people. So once we have them in our custody, why in the world would we turn them back loose again? And whenever the death penalty is pulled off the table, historically, that is exactly what eventually happens.
What would you say to people who say life in prison is worse than the death penalty? Because that's a common argument that they make.
that is such a no-brainer. Yes, but we do have to discuss things so that people can start having the dialogues in their head. Life in prison is definitely a very unappealing thought to anybody. However, it is human nature to be able to adapt to anything.
Yeah.
So the reason that we give people life in prison is to sequester them from the rest of society. So basically, if you're comparing apples and oranges, it's a horrible thing. However, they adapt and they're alive and they are in a new society and they live every day of their life with hope, thanks to our appellate system, which in my opinion is what needs to be fixed. Most inmates on death row actually die of old age because we allow them to appeal until the cows come home, until they're aged and they die of natural causes, or they commit suicide. Those are the most common factors.
And I want to remind people, when you say, I want to prevent what happened to our family to happening to other families, you're not just talking about the actual events that changed the Tate family forever. You're talking about the system afterwards. Deb goes constantly to these hearings. It's like it's a full-time job to what should be the right thing, the normal thing, the decent thing, keeping these people behind bars for life or the death penalty, so you don't have to go through all this. It has become a battle. So we respect you, Deb, and we just thank you for taking your time to come on and discuss this, and we'll see how this develops. It's very disturbing.
Thank you so much, Deb.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. There's so much more to say on this, but we'll save it for another day.
We'll have you back soon.
Yeah,
you can
absolutely.
follow Deb on Twitter at Debra_Tate9.